important the first couple of minutes. I'm going to talk for a couple minutes before I introduce Bill Messenger, who's here to talk about your legal rights, which is what you folks came here to hear today. I want to go on the record to start the meeting by acknowledging all the benefits and the great advancements that unions have made in the history of our country as far as manufacturing and the blue-collar workforce, especially here in Detroit with the auto industry. If you go back to the 40s and 50s when unions were first formed and began negotiating, they accomplished a lot of great things for the middle class. You know, from time and a half to safe working conditions and on and on. The list goes on and on. And I certainly want to acknowledge that and say how much I appreciate that and how fortunate I am to be working for a company that's had collective bargaining for 70, 80 years and established good wages, good benefits, safe working conditions, and all the other benefits that have come from that collective bargaining. Having said that, I want to thank all of you for coming here because I know the impulse of the union is to discourage you from hearing this information. They don't want you to know these things because it might impact their revenue stream, which is your dues money. The union, for the record, does not have any money of its own. All the money they have is taken from the workers. And for a long time, workers didn't really have a problem with paying dues. They were making great strides in negotiations. Wages were increasing well, and benefits increased, it seemed like every contract, and people were pretty happy. You know, they didn't mind paying the couple hours a month for those services, and you know, things rolled along pretty good. But then when the auto industry in particular, and I'm going to speak as a UAW member, but the things I'm talking about will apply pretty much across the board to different unions also. The union somewhere along the line took a left turn, and the elected officials at the very top, and I use the term union bosses a lot. Well, I'm not talking about the folks at the local level, the people we elect. Those people are not our bosses. We're their bosses, okay? We elect them to work for us. So we're really the union bosses at the bottom of the ladder. The union bosses I'm referring to when I talk about people doing things that they shouldn't do or that we don't agree with are the people who are not elected by us. Dennis Williams, the current president of the UAW, went through a lot of promotions and elections after he rose out of the direct level of being elected by workers. He was appointed to certain jobs down at Solidarity House. He was elected by fellow people down there at Solidarity House, and we didn't get to vote on him directly to become our president. So although it's a democratic process at the bottom level where we elect our local officials, people are handpicked to go down to Solidarity House in the UAW or to go to Region 1. And beyond that, from that point on, every advancement they make to a higher level or a different position within the UAW is not voted on by the membership. So that democratic process stops at a relatively low level, and those people advance based on, you know, how well they meet the litmus test of what the bosses up at the top want them to do and say and how they want them to behave. So there's a little bit of a misleading factor there to the union saying, well, we're democratic, our leadership's all elected. That's not necessarily completely true. So as that process has gone on for several decades, our top leadership in the UAW at least has become, in my opinion, more and more disconnected from the average workers out on the floor. And I hear it every day. I don't get a lot of people agreeing in the union and saying they necessarily believe that, but I hear it from the workers. When I go around and talk to workers to promote this event, or when I was running for convention delegate last year, I heard a lot of complaints. I heard a lot of people tell me that they didn't feel they were getting good representation from their elected union official. They felt like they were paying too much after the dues were increased. They were unhappy with how our dues money was used when it was taken out of our strike fund. And for those of you who are here who are not in UAW, you need to know that $300 million was used out of our strike fund. We were told the year before very important contract talks were about to start, that money had been used for other purposes. I don't really care what they were, I don't know what they were, but they were not to pay people who had put the money in there in case we went on strike and they needed to have some income every week if we were out on the picket line. So people were upset about that. And whether the union wants to admit it or not, there's a significant group of people in the UAW membership who are not happy with certain things that are going on. I can tell you from having talked to a lot of union members over the last month or two that there are a number of different factions here. There are guys like me who are politically conservative. They're not happy about the union's political activity, being involved with one political party, and they're just done paying and funding that activity and they want out. Now there's some of you here, I see a couple guys who I know feel that way, and they want to resign from the union because they don't want their money to continue funding issues like the GLBT agenda that the UAW has become so much a part of, and different things. Whatever it is, that's your business, and you have a right to decide whether or not you pay dues that are being used for things like that. And there's another group of folks here who are just upset and disgusted with the UAW members, that is, who are disgusted with the fact that $300 million disappeared out of our strike fund. I'm not suggesting that it was done illegally. There was bylaws and things that allowed them to move that money around and use it for different things. But the average UAW member did not know that the money that was going into our strike fund out of our dues money was going to be used for parades and offices down in Tennessee where they were trying to organize Toyota workers. Workers down south have voted 8 or 9 times that they don't want the UAW to represent them. They're happy with their pay, they're happy with their benefits, they're treated well by their supervisors, and they don't want the UAW to come in. They've seen some of the negative effects of a union representing the workers up here, and they don't want it down there. So my argument on that case is, if you've had 7, 8, now 9 votes by auto workers that are non-union down south, why do you continue to spend our dues money trying to organize those people when they've told you they don't want to be represented by you? They've had secret ballot votes on a number of occasions, and the workers have repeatedly said, we do not want to be represented by the UAW. So in my mind, it's my opinion that the UAW is trying to organize down south for other reasons other than the benefit of the workers. And getting their hands on those Toyota workers' paychecks is what I suspect is their motivation for continuing to try and organize the folks down south. So there's different groups of people here who have different issues, different concerns, and it's not about my beliefs or us trying to convince you that you should resign from the union. That's your decision to make. What we're trying to accomplish today is to give you the information that you need to make an informed decision on your own whether or not you want to continue in the UAW, continue to pay dues. There's sort of an intermediary position you could take where you continue to pay what they call an agency fee, where you just pay for the portion of your dues that are used for collective bargaining purposes, your grievance procedure and representation in the workplace. That's called your Beck rights. Incidentally, that's what I did about a year ago after the dues increase was rammed down our throats at the convention. They went down there, even though everybody I talked to while I was running for convention delegate, virtually everyone, 98, 99% of the people I talked to at my plant said, no, I'm opposed to the dues increase. I'm opposed to them having spent the $300 million out of our strike fund, and I don't want to pay more for them doing less for us. So regardless of what the mood was on the floor, the convention delegates who got elected went to the convention in Detroit and voted to raise our dues by 25%. After 50 years of paying 2 hours a month for our dues, we now pay 2.5 hours a month in dues, roughly $70 to $75 for our representation, which a lot of people are not happy with. We're not getting the kind of contracts we would hope to get. We're giving things back, the last 2 contracts. We've got 2-tier wages now. We've got alternate work schedules now. We have to work on Sunday for straight time. These are things people are upset about. And rather than, after right to work passed, my hopes were that the union would become more responsive and more attentive to what the union members were saying. After all, union members out on the shop floor or wherever you work are the union. You know, the people out on the floor that pay the dues were the union. The people across the street at the local hall or at the region or downtown at Solidarity House in the UAW, those are people we elected to work for us. You can actually think about it as us being their boss. We elect them to work for us, but somewhere along the line, that relationship got turned around, and they are now working, it seems like a lot of the time, for their own benefit, for themselves. So we're trying to give you the information that you need to understand that effective in September, if you're a UAW member, when our contract expires, right to work will take effect for us. You will have the option to decide for yourselves whether or not you want to stay in the UAW and continue to pay dues, whether you want to become a BEC objector and just pay the agency fee, which covers your collective bargaining costs, or whether you want to resign from the union and completely sever ties with them and pay no dues whatsoever. You have the legal right to do any of those things. The union, in my mind, should use that information and that ability that we now have to realize that they have to provide a better service to us and encourage people to want to pay their dues, provide a worthwhile service, and encourage people to stay in that way. And instead of doing that, they've gone the other direction. They spent $300 million of our money that wasn't intended for what they spent it on. They took it out of our strike fund. And the level of our service at the plant level seems to be getting worse, not better. Now I know there's a lot of good people in the union. I've got one of our union officials here that's here to hear what we've got to say. He's a good guy. These guys, a lot of them are in the union for the right reasons. Their motivation is good. They want to help people. They want to help their coworkers. But at the top, it seems like there's been a disconnect. At the international level, our unions have sort of lost touch with us, the union members who pay their salaries, and they become more involved with politics at the national level. They're supporting political candidates who many of their members do not support. I know the UAW was a big supporter of Obamacare when it was introduced by President Obama. Obamacare is going to hurt the UAW members in this next contract because there's a Cadillac tax that's going to kick in 2018 that's going to put a 40% tax on our health care plans. Now, for those of you who don't realize it, our health care premiums are paid by our employer. That's one of the benefits that we've negotiated for, and thanks to the UAW for doing that. But they endorsed Obamacare, even though this 40% tax on our health care plans is going to cause the companies to negotiate to reduce our health care benefits because they're not going to pay that 40%. You know, say your health care plan for you and your wife and your 2 kids costs $10,000 just for the sake of round figures. Well, all of a sudden, that health care plan is going to cost the company $14,000 because there's a 40% tax added on under Obamacare. Now that's going to kick in 2018. It was pushed back purposely because Obama he wanted the support of the unions to get reelected. So he didn't make that effective immediately. He's pretty sneaky, and he set that to happen later on in his presidency, late in his second term. But believe me, it is coming. It's going to come during this next contract. So we're going to pay the price of that in this upcoming round of contract talks. The company is going to negotiate to increase our co-pays, increase our deductibles, reduce our medical coverage to offset the increased costs they're going to have to pay on our healthcare plans starting in 2018. So that's just one example of the types of things that I'm opposed to, and a lot of the people I talk to are opposed to, about how the union at the international level is acting in terms of contract negotiation, political involvement, and that sort of thing. On the local level, we all have issues that are local. We now have to, I think, communicate to our elected officials at the local level that, look, I've been to a town hall, I've done a little research, I've heard labor lawyers speak about these issues, and I know my rights. My rights are, I do not have to continue to stay in the union and pay you any longer after our contract expires if I don't want to. I also know that I elected you to represent me, and you work for me. You're an elected official, I helped elect you, you work for me. So in essence, the empowerment you're going to take hopefully out of this meeting is that the union works for you, and they've always, you know, have been supposed to be working for you, but somewhere along the line they seem to have forgotten that. So we're kind of reinforcing that message that the union does work for you, they should work for you. We're not trying to get rid of them, we're trying to get them to do their jobs properly, and now we have a tool to do that. Right to Work enables us to at least threaten to stop paying them if they don't start doing their job better and they don't start responding to our concerns, our needs in the contract talks and things like that. So that's a message I hope you take away from this town hall. We're very, very privileged today to have Bill Messenger here to speak to us. He's from the Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, and he flew in. The foundation paid for him to come in today, spend the day in Detroit, talk to union members. And he's not an advocate. They're a nonprofit organization. He's not here to advocate for you to do anything. I'm not trying to tell you what you should do. That decision is up to you, but you need to have the information. You need to know what your legal rights are in order to make an informed decision. So whatever your grievances are, whatever your issues are, whatever your concerns with the union are, you are now going to be armed with the information necessary to intelligently make a decision on whether or not you stay in the union and keep paying them dues. Bill's going to talk a little bit about the protections you have should you decide to resign from the union or file as a Beck objector, either of which you're still going to be protected under the terms of the contract because you're still a member of the bargaining unit. The unions, for reasons that Bill will talk about, have union security clauses and exclusive representation agreements with the companies they negotiate with that guarantee their collective bargaining agreement, your contract that you work under, will apply to you whether or not you stay in the union and pay dues or not. I'm a prime example. I resigned from the union last year after the dues increase, pretty much in protest over the dues increase, and I am still paid exactly the same. I have the same benefits. I'm going to have the same retirement. My health care when I retire will be the same as yours. The unions are not allowed to change any of that. They're all provided by the company, and they will continue to be provided whether I pay dues to that third party, the union, or not. So he's going to explain to you how that happens, why it happens, and what laws are in place to protect you, whether you stay in the union and pay dues, or whether you get out, pay partial dues, a membership fee, or whether you pay no dues at all. You can do any of those you want at no risk to yourself. The union cannot harass you, they cannot threaten you, they cannot try to get you fired. If you ever do get into some deep legal trouble at work, or you have whatever issues you might have, and you get to the point where you might be terminated, these guys are there to represent you and stick up for you. The union will still represent you. They legally are obligated to, and if they're not doing it to the best of their ability, Bill will have a phone number for you and a website you can go to. They are a resource that you can use. They're there for employees who work in unionized workplaces. So you have lots of resources. Bill's going to talk about the legal aspects of right to work, Beck rights, exclusive representation agreements, and security clauses. Those are all things that apply to us. You definitely need to know about it. So I'll turn it over to Bill. His presentation is going to take 20 or 30 minutes. I'll get back up and just give you a couple of quick examples of how I think we can use these laws to pressure the union to start treating us better, representing us better, and representing us better in contract talks, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for all coming out today. And as Brian mentioned, what I'd like to discuss with you today is your legal rights. And in particular, I want to address three subjects: your rights to be a union member or not to be a union member, your rights regarding payment of union dues and fees, and how to exercise those rights. But before I get into that, the one thing I won't be discussing today, as Brian mentioned, is to advocate that you exercise your legal rights in any particular way. Whether you want to be a union member or not a union member, it's completely up to you. Whether a particular union is a good union or a bad union, again, that's not really anything I have an opinion on. I'm just here as an attorney just to discuss an overview of what your rights and options are. So the first topic is, what are your rights regarding union membership? And that's rather straightforward. Federal law guarantees all employees the right to both be a union member and the right not to be a union member. And restrictions on that right are generally illegal. So for example, an employer cannot require that employees not join the union. That would be illegal. Employers can also not require that all employees join the union. An employer can require that employees may pay certain fees to a union, which we'll discuss later, but an employer cannot require full union membership as a condition of employment. That was called a closed shop, and it's been illegal since 1947. Unions can also not restrict the right to membership and non-membership. And in particular, a union cannot restrict the right of a union member to resign their membership. Right now, under federal law, anyone here who's a union member has the right to resign their membership at any time and without restriction, simply by sending a letter or making any different kind of communication to the union saying, I no longer want to be a member, and that resignation is effective soon thereafter as a matter of law. Now, one question I often get is, if I'm represented by a union, doesn't that make me a union member? And the answer to that question is no. There's a very big difference between union representation and union membership. Union representation refers to the ability of a union to act as the exclusive representative of all employees in a bargaining unit, which means all employees in a certain job classification. So for example, here it may be all production workers at a particular Ford plant. The UAW is the exclusive representative of all of them for purposes of dealing with their employer. But that does not make you a union member. Union membership refers to actually being a member of a union as an organization. For example, being a member of a club, just like joining the Rotary Club or any other kind of organization. But again, representation doesn't make you a union member. And so an example I like to use is political representation. You know, right now we're in a congressional district. I believe Candace Miller is the congresswoman for this district. She's a Republican. She has the right to represent everyone in this district for purposes of dealing in Congress. But that doesn't mean that everyone here is a member of the Republican Party. Of course, you have the right to be a member of the Republican Party or a member of the Democrat Party or not be a member of any of them. She's your representative, but she doesn't make you a member of her political party. Same things with the union. And that brings to a second question, is what are the implications of being a union member or a non-member? And the basic rule of thumb is it will not affect your relationship with your employer, your membership status, but it will affect your relationship with the union. So turning first to the employer, as I mentioned earlier, an employer cannot discriminate against employees because of their membership or non-membership in a union. Or stated differently, every employer must treat a union member and non-member the same. So an employer cannot say, everyone who's a union member gets an extra $1 an hour. And it can't say, anybody who doesn't join the union gets $1 less an hour. Federal law prohibits discrimination in terms and conditions of employment to encourage or discourage union membership. That's actually a quote from the federal statute. Now what this means is if you work for an employer that is union represented, the employer cannot treat you differently if you choose to become a non-member of the union. You're entitled to the same pay, the same seniority, the same job classifications, everything else that is provided by the employer in the union contract, or even if there's not a union contract, has to be without discrimination in terms of whether an individual is a member or a non-member. And one aspect to mention of that includes your health and welfare plans or pension plans if you have them. Now sometimes there's confusion on that because it'll say, for example, just use the UAW as an example, it's the UAW pension fund. Well, actually that organization, the UAW pension fund, isn't actually the UAW. It's a separate organization set up with trustees. It may say UAW at the front, but it's actually more or less half run by the company. And the company funds it. And because the company funds it, they can't discriminate between members and non-members. So whatever pension you've accrued or whatever health benefits you've accrued because of your employment, hours of work, they can't say You're entitled to it only if you're a union member, or deprived it because you're a non-union member, or not a member of the union. The employer can't discriminate. Now, when it comes to internal union benefits, however, it's a different story. Again, if you're a member of a union, you're a member of the club. If you're not a member of the club. So anything that's internal to the union has the right to not give to non-members. So to give an example, if you became a non-member of a union, the union can exclude you from membership meetings because, again, they can say members only. The union can say you no longer have the right to vote on union officers and stewards because that's considered an internal union affair. The union, and this one's sort of counterintuitive, can restrict voting on the contract to only union members. Now, that is one that does affect employment, but the courts have held that's actually an internal union membership function for reasons I can discuss if anybody really wants to know, but that's the bottom line to it. And also, any benefits that are provided solely by the union and not by the employer, the union can make union members only. So if the union has a special deal for credit cards, or there's a union softball team, or whatever it is, if you drop out of the union and resign, the union can exclude them from you. So basically, in summary, if your employer gives it to you, you can't be deprived of it by becoming a non-member of the union. If the union gives it to you, or if it's an internal union affair, you can be deprived of that. And just one other thing is that if you're a non-member, you could be deprived of internal union benefits, but you also are not subject to internal union obligations. Unions have the authority under their constitution and bylaws to discipline their members, which means basically they can fine their members. So for example, if you were a member of a union and went to work during a union strike, they can fine you, and they do. And they can enforce that fine in court because as a member of that organization, you're bound to its rules. You're a member of the club, you're bound to the club's rules. But if you're a non-member of the union has no authority to discipline you under its internal rules and bylaws. So if it's internal to the union, your membership either gets you, membership or non-membership gets you in or out of it. But with your employer, they can't treat you differently. And so the second topic I want to address is what are your rights concerning union dues and fees? And of course, this is tied into membership and non-membership, but it's a big enough subject to address separately. Now, if you're a union member, it's very straightforward. You have to pay full union dues and fees. Join the club, you have to pay whatever the due structure is that they put in place. However, if you're a non-member, what fees, if any, you owe depends on whether or not you're covered by a right-to-work law. Now, the situation here in Michigan is a little complicated because, of course, Michigan is now a right-to-work state, but the way the law was passed is the law only applies to contracts entered into after March 28th of 2013. So if you're subject to a union contract that was entered into before March 28th of 2013, you're not covered by the right-to-work law yet. You're still non-right-to-work. But once that contract expires, or if it's changed in any way, then the right-to-work law kicks in. So because of that, I'll discuss both what your fee obligations are, non-right-to-work, and right-to-work as a non-member, because that may apply to all of you, or depending on your situation. So if you're not yet covered by the right-to-work law, again, the union and employer cannot require that you join the union, but they can require that you pay what's called a service fee or an agency fee. And that authority comes from the union contract. The union contract will have a clause. It'll be called the Union Security Clause, Union Shop Clause, something to that effect. It'll basically say, as a condition of employment, all employees must pay dues or fees to the union or you're fired. And that is enforceable. But the most that the union can charge you is a percentage of union dues, a percentage of full union dues under a case called Communication Workers versus Beck. And this is often referred to as Beck rights. And basically, the union can charge you a fee for contract negotiation and things related to it, but can't charge you a fee for things not related to contract negotiation, like politics and such. And so just to use the UAW as an example, the UAW's Beck fee for August of 2014 to August of 2015, that's their fiscal year, is 68% of full union dues. So if you were a non-member and not covered by a right-to-work law, that's what they could force you to pay, is a fee equal to 68% of union dues. That percentage will change every year depending on a union audit. And more information on this, and I should have passed this out, I apologize, is the UAW actually has a BEC notice on its website. And I brought a copy of that with me today. And this is from the UAW itself. It's also in their magazine that explains what your BEC rights are, how to exercise them, and also what the percentage is. So if you're not yet covered by a right to work law, you can be forced to pay a fee. That fee is so-called BEC fee or service fee. Now, if you are covered by a right to work law, you can't be forced to pay anything. That's what a right to work law does. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation about what a right to work law does, and really it only does one thing. It prohibits compulsory fee requirements. That's it. And so under a right to work law, you can't be forced to pay a fee to keep your job to the union. Without a right to work law, you can be forced to pay the BEC fee. That's the difference. And so, again, to summarize, if you're a union member, you have to pay full union dues. If you're a non-member, not covered by a right to work, you have to pay at least a BEC fee. And if you're a non-member covered by right to work, you don't have to pay anything. So then the final topic to address before I think we open it up to questions is how do you exercise your rights? Now on this, I want to emphasize this is just a very general overview of how to exercise your rights. It can vary for individuals. So please don't construe this as legal advice to any particular individual, but just as a general matter. So the first question is, how do you become a union member? Well, it's simple. Just ask the union and they'll tell you pretty quickly. And usually it requires signing a union membership card saying you want to join and agree to abide by the bylaws. What if you want to be a non-member of the union? Well, if you never join the union, you already are a non-member. That's the default, non-membership. Unless you join the club, you're not in the club. So what if you are a union member? To resign your union membership, you simply need to send a letter to the union saying, I resign, or I don't want to be a union member anymore, or something to that effect, just basically expressing that you want out. And as discussed earlier, the union cannot restrict your right to resign. And in fact, there's a case that applies a mailbox rule. If you send a resignation letter, it's automatically effective, your resignation, at 12:01 a.m. the next day after it's postmarked. Now again, not the day you throw it in the mailbox, the day it's postmarked. The only sometimes restriction they could put on, it's not really a restriction, it's more ministerial, is sometimes they can require that it be sent to the right address. So you can't, send it, for example, sometimes you just send it to the company, the union say that's not good enough, you have to tell us. But generally, resigning's rather straightforward. Just send a resignation letter. So what if you want to pay the service fee or the BEC fee? Very similar procedure. You have to be a non-member or become one, and you have to tell the union you want to pay the service fee. And this can be done in the same letter at the same time. You don't have to first become a non-member, then request a service fee. You can do it all in the same letter. However, with the option to pay the BEC fee or service fee, the union can put on more procedures and restrictions. So for example, here I believe this, the handout being passed around, or I'm sorry, the one here. The UAW requires the notice be sent to a particular address at the International's headquarters.
Bill, just let me interject. I'm passing around a sample of the letter I sent in to resign from the union and claim my BEC rights last year. It's just a sample for you to look at as an example of the type of letter you would have to send. Of course, you wouldn't put Sterling Axle Plant if you don't work at the axle plant. You would change that and you'd put your name in there, but that's what he's talking about. And I'm just passing that around as a sample for you to look at. I'm not telling anybody go ahead and take this and do anything, but you need to see what you have to send in. The address on there is the correct address to UAW International that you would use if you're a UAW member.
Yes. And different unions have different BEC procedure requirements. They can't be particularly onerous, but usually it's something you have to send a letter to a certain place. And then the union has a legal obligation to reduce your fees down to the reduced amount and to provide you with a financial audit that justifies their fees so you can see if you think you're being overcharged or not. So that's the service fee. And then the final question is, what if you're a non-member and want to exercise your right to work? Basically, all you have to do is be a non-member or become a non-member. Once you're not a member of the union and you're covered by right to work, there's no longer any requirement in the contract that requires that you pay anything to the union. Because again, right to work prohibits union shock clauses and contracts. So let's say, for example, you became a non-member when you're not covered by right to work. When right to work kicks in, your fees should go to zero. However, of course, there's always a catch. And this is one potential roadblock that, again, may vary, may be a problem for individuals, may not. It really depends. And that's what's called a dues deduction authorization. And I just want to discuss that for a moment. A dues deduction authorization is something an individual signs that authorizes their employer to take union dues right out of their paycheck. And it's really a convenient way to pay instead of sending a check every month or what have you. So probably most of you who are union members, your dues come right out of the paycheck. Now, to authorize that by federal law, you had to sign something. They couldn't just take it. And so, again, I have a copy of a UAW authorization as an example attached. We'll pass that out in the end. But they're all more or less similar. And usually, if you were a union member, you probably signed a union dues deduction card. And oftentimes it's done when you were hired. You know, they say sign the forms, here's the tax form, here's this form, here's a deduction form. It's just something that usually gets signed as a ministerial matter. Here's the problem with exercising your right to work with a dues deduction clause. Some dues deduction clauses say, I agree to let the employer take dues out of my paycheck, even if I become a non-member of the union. And they might further say, I agree that this deduction is irrevocable for 1 year unless I revoke during a certain short window period. And so basically what that agreement says is you voluntarily agreed to pay dues even if you drop out of the union, you no longer become a member, and that you can't cut that off for an entire year except for during a short window period. So I'll use the UAW's dues checkoff agreement as an example. That says it can only be revoked in a window period by sending a letter to the company by registered mail between 20 to 10 days on the anniversary date that you signed it. So if you sign that checkoff card, let's just say Christmas, December 25th, the only time you can revoke it is between December 5th and December 15th by sending a registered letter to the company. And if you don't, you have to pay dues for the entire rest of the year, even if you're a non-member. Now, whether or not all dues deduction cards require that, it depends on the language of the card. And sometimes those requirements can be illegal. So for example, that 10-day window period is a rather onerous restriction on an individual's right to work, I would submit. So I can't say as a general matter, will that be an impediment to each of your individuals if you decide to exercise your rights? But it's something to know about. So what I would suggest is if you're considering exercising your right to work, ask for a copy of your dues deduction agreement so you know what it says. And if you find what somebody else's says, most likely yours says the exact same thing. They generally use the same form over and over. And if you have any questions about, is this a problem? Or if you do attempt to invoke your rights and the union says no, this dues deduction card locks you in whether you like it or not, you can contact the National Right to Work Foundation for legal assistance. And we'll take a look at the card and try to advise you the best we can of what your options may be. So I don't want to sound too dissuading because sometimes it's not an impediment. So for example, the UAW card doesn't contain any language saying, I agree to pay even if I'm not a member. So a strong argument can be made that that card doesn't require you to pay if you're no longer a member. But again, you have to see exactly how this all plays out. And it just depends on the exact card and on the exact language. So again, to summarize how to exercise your right, you want to be a union member, ask the union. You want to be a non-member, send a resignation letter. You want to be a service fee payer, send the Beck objection letter that Brian referred to. You want to exercise your right to work, just be a non-member, but watch for the dues deduction agreement to see if that's locked you in to any fee requirements that you may not want to have. And so with that, just want to mention again, for more information, for really a summary of what I just said, the National Right to Work Foundation has a website. It's nrtw.org. Just Google it, it'll pop up. There's more information there, sample letters, and you can also send emails to us with any questions, and we'll help to the best of our ability. And so with that, Brian, did you want to make some closing remarks, and then we'll open it up for any questions you all may have.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Thanks for coming. Okay, I'm just going to make some real brief comments that kind of relate to what Bill just told us. Again, he wasn't advocating, he was telling you what your rights are. This is your decision. You have to know what your legal options are, and now hopefully you do. You're going to have to do a little bit of the legwork yourself. When I decided I wanted to stop paying dues after the dues increase last year, I went online, Like Bill said, their website has all kinds of information. It has sample letters that you can tailor to your own letter if you want to send it into the international, if you're in the UAW, or to whatever union you're in. You have to find out where the national headquarters is and get the address. You're going to have to do a little bit of work to find out. But they're a great resource to have, and please take advantage of it. Go to their website and check it out. Now, what I'm envisioning that this knowledge will do for us is empower us to get our unions to be a better agent in the collective bargaining process. Honest to God, I've said it over and over for years now, since I was supporting Right to Work in 2011 and 12. Right to Work, I believe, should make the unions better representatives of the workers. It should improve the collective bargaining process by giving the workers the power to have their voices heard and to get our elected representatives to act better and more responsibly and more accountably to us. So this is not an effort to destroy the unions or get rid of unions at all. This is an effort to use the collective bargaining process to our advantage as best we can. And we want our union agents to do that. So you now have a tool, you have the knowledge to know that you can resign from the union if you want, you can stop paying dues, and that should be enough to influence our elected officials. If enough people get this information, to put pressure on your elected officials at the local level and to put some pressure on the international union representatives to start addressing the issues that are concerning us. Two-tier pay, alternate work schedules, them spending money out of our strike fund without us giving our approval. Those kind of things need to be decided by the membership, and we want to have a bigger voice. So I hope you use this information to empower yourselves. And now let me give you a couple of quick examples of how I think you can do that, and then we'll open it up to questions. On the dues increase, I'm furious over the fact that the UAW spent $300 million of our money out of our strike fund that was set aside in case we go on strike the year before contract talks. That was asinine, it was ignorant, I can't believe they did it. Everybody virtually that I talked to was upset about it, and I've got a proposal, a strategy that I think might help get our dues reduced back down to 2 hours a month from the 2.5 that they raised it to. Now when the UAW told us that they wanted to raise our dues to 2.5 hours to repay supposedly the strike fund money that they had spent, they used the argument or the rationale that we need to have a healthy strike fund going into next year's contract talks in order to use that as influence in the contract talks to say, hey, if we go out on strike, we've got $950 million sitting in our strike fund. We could stay out as long as we want and walk the picket lines and shut Ford or Chrysler or GM, whoever they target, down. Well, what they didn't tell you is when they voted at the convention last year to raise our dues to 2.5 hours, they did not put a sunset date on it for the day after the contract negotiations ended, because there will be no more need to pay more into that fund after we've agreed to a new contract. So, you know, assuming that we don't go on strike, that fund is going to continue to grow just like it was before. It had gotten up to nearly $1 billion. That's our dues money that's building that fund up. And it would continue to grow again. After these contract talks are over, we could reduce the dues amount taken from us back down to 2 hours. That fund will continue to grow over the years and into the next contract cycle. It'll be back up there in that $900 million range again, and it'll be healthy on its own without us paying more every month. But the UAW didn't do that. You gotta wonder what their motivation was for not, if they're concerned about us and us having money to spend for our families, why didn't they set a date? We're gonna raise the dues up until September 16th of 2015, and then it'll revert back down to 2 hours a month. Because they weren't just concerned about having a healthy strike fund going into the contract talks. They were concerned about taking as much money from us in dues as they could possibly get out of us, and that's going to continue indefinitely. Until they would vote to reduce it, it's going to stay at 2.5 hours a month. So my proposal is this. We draft a letter, and I would volunteer to put something together if enough people are interested, that says we, the undersigned UAW members, want our dues to be reduced back to the 2 hours a month that were taken from us as dues for approximately 50 years, because after September 15th of this year, there will be no reason to keep it inflated to 2.5 hours. We don't need to accelerate rebuilding that fund. We did not go on strike. We did not deplete the fund. We want our dues to be reduced back to the traditional 2 hours a month that they were for 50 years. The UAW used to get their revenue increases every contract cycle by negotiating for base pay wages from its members. If we were making $20 an hour and they got us a 3 or 4% increase over the length of the contract, our pay went up to $22 an hour or whatever that would leave it at over that 4 years, and those 2 hours were worth $44 a month instead of $40 a month. That's how the UAW got their revenue increases, by getting us raises. Well, the last 2 contracts, they haven't gotten us any raises. They're already telegraphing us that they're not going to get the seniority employees a raise this time. Their top priority is going to be closing the gap, they say, from the 2-tier people. And that doesn't mean raising our wages. That means bringing the 2-tier people up a little bit. But then at the same time, they've told the 2-tier people, well, we're not going to bring you up. We don't think we're going to be able to get you up to full pay. So they're already kind of preparing them for a small raise, probably $2, $3 an hour over the length of the contract. So the union's kind of misleading people, sending mixed signals. I think we need to send the union a signal. You either reduce our dues back down to the traditional 2 hours a month, effective the day after this contract is ratified, or I have the power to resign from the union and stop paying you any dues whatsoever. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of you go ahead and do that. I'm just suggesting that we threaten to use that power that we now know we have to get them to reduce our dues back down to 2 hours a month. That's not anti-union, that's pro-worker, and that's something the union should be very willing to listen to. And if enough people speak up and say that and sign on to a letter that says that, we'll send it off to the International and our voices will be heard. Another way we could use right to work to our advantage, I don't see too many 2-tier people here, there are a handful, but if I was a 2-tier entry-level employee that was under the UAW contract right now, you folks are making less than the non-union auto workers down at the Toyota plants down south. You are. For those of you who aren't familiar with what they make down there, you can go online, Google it, find out for yourselves. Those, they call them production team members. They're non-union. They do have councils that meet periodically with their leadership, the administration at their plants, to discuss issues and complaints they might have. Although they don't have a union, they have a way for those complaints to make it up to the administration of the individual plants. But those folks are making 24, 25 bucks an hour. They have windows that they don't all make exactly the same. Different jobs pay a couple dollars difference, where we're all pretty much at the exact same pay within a few pennies. So those folks are making more than you down there without the benefit of the union. They do not have to pay union dues to get that pay. They have a 401k plan for their retirement plan. They have a good health care plan. They have all those benefits. And I'll give credit to the UAW. They broke that ground and they negotiated for those kind of things decades ago. And I'm very grateful to have the kind of health care benefits and retirement plan and everything that I have. But they've got the same thing down south now at the Toyota plants. They're making a good living wage with their profit sharing and bonuses. They're making $70,000, $80,000 a year, most of them, and they're doing very well. So getting back to the 2-tier people in the UAW, if I was an entry-level employee up here in the UAW plant paying dues to the UAW, and I was making less than non-union workers down south, what I would do effective immediately is I would draft a letter saying I represent all of the undersigned entry-level employees, and we could get as many signatures as you could. You could take it from one plant to another. You could get several hundred people on there just to send the message that there were a lot of you out there who had this concern. And I would say, if you do not bring us a contract back after these contract negotiations this year that brings us up to full pay with our coworkers that we're working side by side with, and a lot of these entry-level folks are making 18, 19 bucks an hour, and they're working right next to somebody who's making $28 or $29 an hour. If if you don't bring us a contract back that brings us up to pay parity, or pretty darn close to it, I will resign my membership in the UAW and stop paying you dues effective September 16th when our current contract expires. And you just heard how to do it from Bill. So you now have that power to do that, to use that power to influence the UAW leadership downtown going into contract talks, which are just about to start, to make eliminating that two-tier pay gap, eliminate that in this next contract. Now, that may or may not be realistic, I don't know, but I know what the collective bargaining process is supposed to do. You go in with your goals, you set them high, you don't negotiate with yourself before the contract talks start. You don't say, well, we would settle for a $2 or $3 an hour raise. You go in and say, look, I want to make the same wage that the person next to me is making doing the exact same job. So that should be your position as an entry-level worker. There's no reason in the world why you shouldn't demand that and expect that from your union. That's what collective bargaining is all about. There's nothing wrong with having those expectations and wanting your union to accomplish that for you. Now, if it's realistic or not, that's another issue. You know, realistically, I think you guys could probably get your wage increase in this next contract brought up to about what the Toyota workers are making, that $24, $25 an hour range. And then the company's, in my opinion, going to wait for all of us seniority legacy employees who are making top dollar, full wages. They're waiting for us to retire, and you guys will be the new standard. Probably somewhere around what Toyota and Volkswagen and Nissan and those non-union plants down south make. That's just my own opinion. But your goal, really, in my view, should be to ask for pay parity with your legacy seniority employee coworkers that you're working right next to, $28, $29 an hour. Nothing wrong with wanting that. And you should send a letter to the International saying, I know I can resign my union rights now and stop paying dues, and I'm prepared to do that if you're not willing to make elimination of the two-tier pay system your #1 priority going into these contract talks. Those are the kind of examples of things you can do with the right to work law to use them for pro-worker leverage against the negotiators. That is not anti-union. Now, I get called anti-union for proposing those kind of things, but I hope you understand that is not anti-union. That's pro-worker. It's trying to get the union to operate better for you, to be more aggressive, to work more in your interests. Being critical of the union, holding them accountable, that is not anti-union. That is pro-worker. So try to walk out of here today. We're going to open it up to questions and answers now. Please leave this meeting with this knowledge of what your rights are and use it to empower yourselves. You are the union. You are the bosses of that union. The people you elected to represent you work for you, and don't let them forget that. Okay, we want the union to function better. Now I'll open it up to questions. There's one in the back right here. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I wonder if you could comment on this. When the right to work issue was going on, the big complaint was the quote-unquote freeloader status.
Yeah.
Could you comment on how that works, if that's a myth or if that's true?
It's kind of a myth, and I'm gonna give you my 2 cents about that and how I respond to that when I'm called that. And I was called that probably 500 times this week on Facebook. But I'll let Bill get up too after I'm done making my comments, and he can explain the legal aspects of union security clauses and exclusive representation agreements. It's actually the union who insists on their contract that they negotiate applying to every worker in the bargaining unit. The unions do not want, for example, if the UAW was open to competition and 200 people in a UAW plant were able to resign from the union, there would be a line of union representatives from other unions outside at the turnstiles at the gates the next day handing out cards wanting to represent the group of people who had resigned from the UAW. So they negotiate what's called an exclusive representation agreement with the companies that they bargain with that says our collective bargaining agreement that we negotiate will apply to every member of the specific bargaining group. That eliminates any possibility of another union coming in and competing with them. So it's actually the union that provides that protection to you under that umbrella. And it's not going away, believe me. If everybody in this room sent their letter in tomorrow and resigned from the UAW, they're not going to change their exclusive representation agreement with the company so that all of a sudden you're left out there and not covered by the contract. That's not going away. They're going to continue to have these exclusive representation agreements and union security clauses so that everybody in that bargaining unit is going to be covered by whatever collective bargaining agreement they negotiate, whether you're in the union and pay dues or not. So don't let them scare you. Those are scare tactics, Dave, and they use them all the time. It's a total false statement.
So could we safely make the statement that it was the union bosses that created the freeloader status?
Yeah, and they turn it around and try and use it on us when they know full well that they're the ones who insist on their agreements applying to every single one of us. They don't want anybody to get away. They don't want anybody else to go to another union and be represented by them. It's their own greed that extends that protection to us. We're all covered by the contract. I'm a prime example. I resigned from the UAW last year. I'm no longer in the UAW. I'm a non-member. I pay an agency fee until September when I can fully resign. And I will fully resign in that window, 10 to 20 days before my hiring date, which for me was 11/11. So at the beginning of November, or at the very end of October, I will send that registered letter to the International, and I will say I do not want dues checkoff to apply to me anymore, or whatever the specific wording will have to be. I do not want you to take any more dues out of my check for union purposes. I am a non-member and I do not want to pay any more dues. So I'll hit their little window. They make it as hard as they can for you to get out, but I know when my hiring date was, and I'm sure all you other UAW members know very well the date you hired in. We have to use that date all the time on paperwork. And I know that 10 to 20 days prior to that hiring date, I have to send them a registered letter, which is no big deal. You just go to the post office and send it registered. It costs you $1 or $2 to do it. But I will gladly go up to the post office and send them the registered letter to that address that I need to send it to and say, please do not take any more money out of my paychecks. I'm a non-member and I work for Ford. I'm not giving anything up, but I do not want to pay dues to the union anymore. So that's a misnomer completely. If you have questions, please ask them. Bill, did you want to say anything about the scab freeloader thing and how security clauses and exclusive representation agreements protect us? It's actually the union's making, correct?
Yes, I think you summed it up very well.
Okay.
I mean, it's
I'm
basically...
a lawyer. I'm a knucklehead auto worker, and but I know from experience and from reading the literature that they have on their website, I've learned through the process, and that's what I'm trying to help you folks avoid, is having to learn all the process. You're getting a lot of information right here today, and the rest of the information you might need will be on their website. Then the decision's up to you. All I wanted to do was get the information out there so that folks in unions are able to make the decision on their own. That's your right, it's your decision. Yes?
Yeah, can I have that website again, please?
Bill?
It's www, of course, NRTW, and then .org.
NRTW.org. And the NRTW stands for National Right to Work. And they're a great resource. I've used them extensively, and I'll say for the 10th time today, not because I'm anti-union, not because they're anti-union, I am 100% in favor of collective bargaining. It's a very important process. It's done great things for the middle class, accomplished a lot, primarily 60, 70 years ago. But the agent that we have to do our collective bargaining, the union, made a left turn somewhere 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and they've gotten heavily involved in politics, and that's where my issue is. So again, I'm definitely a supporter of collective bargaining. This is not going to interfere with or hurt collective bargaining one bit. Unions aren't going away. We're always going to have a union doing our collective bargaining for us. But now individuals have the right to hold them accountable, and that's what we're trying to accomplish, is to give you that information. Yeah, again.
I appreciate everything that being said here today. I'm a liar.
Thank you.
I'm just trying to wonder, why isn't there more people here? Why isn't there more new hires here?
I was wondering the same thing myself.
Well, when you have a little time in and you go to meetings like this, you know, there might be other intimidating tactics that might be used on you on the floor, because not only does the union, you know, can do things like that. They also, you know, go golfing with management and talk to their supervisors to, oh, we was a minute dock them. Oh, we wanted the day off. Oh, sorry, we AWOL,
Yeah.
we'll correct it.
I'll-
That's the type of things that they play too. So it's not, you know, strictly divided union and management.
Right.
There's a lot of other mingling that goes on.
You know, the union, in my opinion, has responded to the right to work law the wrong way. I was hoping when I was fighting to help get right to work passed, that the union would respond positively and become a better organization, more responsible, more accountable, do a better job, and make workers want to stay in. And I still have that hope. That's why we're here today. They went the other way. When they spent that $300 million out of our strike fund and then raised our dues and told us to pay it back, I realized it was pointless to stay in the union and to keep fighting it from within. I had run for convention delegate because I wanted to go down to the convention in Detroit and vote no on the dues increase and stand up and say why I was against it. But at our plant, the union officials who are in office, a lot of them have been there for years. The hiring process was controlled, or you know, they had a big role in the hiring process for a long time. They've gotten a lot of friends and relatives in, and those people are their voting base. So when we voted on convention delegates, I got 174 votes for convention delegate, which I thought was not too bad for a guy who had been labeled anti-union for the last 15 or 20 years. But I did not get enough to go to the convention and vote on the dues increase. So the same old faces, the usual suspects got sent down there. And even though 98% of the people I talked to were against the dues increase, they were extremely upset about it. All the delegates, the 4 delegates our local sent down to the convention, I assume they voted yes. They didn't hold a recorded vote because they didn't want anybody to be held accountable. It was a voice vote. So it got passed overwhelmingly. Nobody knows who voted yes, who voted no. And it's just another example of how the union kind of rams things through, does what they want to do without really listening to the voices of the membership. Again, I talked to 98% of the people I talked to were against the dues membership raise. What happened? The dues got raised. Mike?
Ryan, with the 300 million strike fund, you know, I know in the last couple contracts or the last contract that Chrysler and GM have a no strike clause.
Yeah, it expired, to my knowledge, it expired though, going into these talks, yeah.
It has expired.
It has expired, I
Because I was
believe.
just gonna question why we would need, you know, a dues increase for a strike fund that you really can't even.
Well, it didn't
you can
apply-
ultimately only use it for health and safety now, you know what
Right.
I'm saying?
It did not apply to Ford because Ford, that wasn't a condition because Ford hadn't gotten any of those bailout funds. They got some money, but it wasn't part of that package Chrysler and GM were subject to. And then they ultimately did end up filing for bankruptcy. But yeah, well, whatever the rationale was, it does not apply after this contract is ratified, because then there's no reason whatsoever to continue to take more dues money from us, because we've ratified the contract, we did not go on strike, you know, I'll assume, and there's no reason to keep our dues up at 2.5 hours. That fund will rebuild itself over the course of the next 4 years on its own at 2 hours a month. That's what it had been doing for years. It was at $960-some million, almost $1 billion of our dues money was sitting in that fund. They took 1/3 of it, 300 million and something, and spent it on other things. And now we're being forced to pay it back. So we're gonna fight to get that reduced back to 2 hours a month. Kim?
I'd like to ask on a legal standpoint, I've seen.
Speak up a little bit, please, they're
Oh,
recording this.
I've seen Brian bullied over a period of time because of what he chose to do. Let's say we do get a smaller group or a larger group that chooses to do this.
Mhm.
Is there any legal standpoint that we aren't treated differently at work? I know a lot of people, you know, feel that way, but is there anything legally to do about that?
Yes, there.
Absolutely.
Oh, sorry. Yes, there is. The question becomes usually proving it. So it's illegal for an employer to interfere with an individual's right to be a union member or non-member. So if the company did something,
It's not usually the company.
or if it's the union.
Right.
The union also, under the National Labor Relations Act, can't basically take actions to interfere with someone's right to be a member or non-member of the union. The question becomes, A, how far can the union go before hitting that legal standard? So just being, you know, verbally not nice may not be enough. But of course, you know, pushing someone, that would be a violation.
Right.
And then when it becomes more murky, did the union really do it? It becomes a question of proof.
Right.
So there certainly are legal protections there, but whether you can prove it in each individual case, becomes, really depends on case-by-case type standard.
Thank you.
Brian, I got another one.
Okay, Mike, go ahead.
I'm gonna bring this up. Your VCAP, which is a community action program. Your VCAP, which is a community action program, I never signed up for it. I never signed any letter. I never signed anything, any card or anything, but yet somehow magically it gets taken out of my paycheck. I never signed anything for it. And it's like, I don't know, $3 or $5 or $10 a month, depending on it. And I don't think some people are aware of it, but sometimes those cards get filled out, and the next thing you know, that's getting pulled out of your check. And to try to get that off is almost an act of God, like, you gotta send the letter to the right place and all that. So I just wanna bring that up, that gets put on people's check, and they don't knowingly fill out any paperwork for that, but it gets put on there.
Right.
It's gotten put on my check in the last 3 years.
That's something you definitely need to get taken care of, Mike. I'm surprised you let it go on for more
Well,
than a month.
I've talked about it with people, like,
Well,
I never signed any VCAP stuff, but yet it gets
That should
taken
stop
out of my check.
immediately, and
You know?
I'm gonna guess that Bill and his organization would be willing to get involved if you're trying to do that and you're not being allowed to do that by the union because they run that. Bill, do you wanna address that a little bit? Because that's definitely a violation. He didn't fill out a card, they're taking money out of his paycheck for political purposes. He said they didn't, he didn't
I know I
authorize.
didn't fill a card out for it, I know that.
Exactly, and it would be extremely illegal for the union to do that. It would violate not only a labor statute that prohibits deductions from wages without an authorization, but also the Federal Election Campaign Act,
Because
which,
some new hires have come up to me and said, what does VCAP stand for, some type of vacation pay?
No,
Because it's VCAP, so
Yeah.
they assume that it's some type of, couple bucks a month goes to some type of pay for my
Sure.
vacation, but that's not the case.
absolutely, it's a political action committee. And so what I would do is, try to get from the company a copy of anything you allegedly signed.
Exactly.
Because sometimes, like where I've usually seen PAC contributions, it's part of a form with other things on it. Usually it's not a separate form, but if they can't prove that you signed something, or if you get it and somebody else signs your name, it's very illegal. That's serious stuff.
I and other people have noticed that.
Yeah. So I would,
That happened to them too.
yeah, so I would definitely, tell them you didn't sign it, and then, make them prove, like, show me the signature. And without it, it violates a lot of laws, for them to take that from individuals without their true consent.
Okay, something like that, again, you're gonna have to take the initiative. A lot of this stuff, the union's gonna make it a little hard for you to jump through these hoops. Of course, they want that money, they use it for political purposes. If they can continue to get VCAP contributions out of you, and you just forget about it and say, well, it's only $2, $3 a month, big deal, and you forget about it, they're gonna continue doing it. So you need to really press it, say, I want the card, I wanna stop that. There's a card that you can fill out to stop that. And Norm Hughes here, who's chairman of the Michigan Freedom to Work organization, just told me the law on that changed a year or so ago. You used to have to reauthorize that every year, but I guess now it's continuing and just carries on until you tell them you want to stop. So you have to take the initiative and do it. Mike, let me ask Dave, I'll get to you in a minute. Go ahead, Mike.
I just wanted to touch on that as a member
Yeah.
of the VCAP.
Yeah. You probably know more about it than any of us. Yeah.
So,
Go ahead and explain.
well, I don't know your specific
I know,
issue.
I know.
And if you have a concern about it, did you go across the street and talk to somebody?
I talked to the committee man about it, I just kinda been working at it for about the last week or two.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
you need to follow up on that, because that's obviously an individual issue with your VCAP dollars, whether something inadvertently got signed, whatever the case may be, and I'm not gonna allege any wrong.
I know, neither am I, I'm saying that, I've had other people come up to me, new hires.
That's pretty good.
Asking about, is this a vacation pay deal? Because it's VCAP, they don't know any better.
For those of you who don't know, Mike and Mike work at the same plant, and Mike is kind of responsible for part of that VCAP plan. And that's not saying he did anything wrong, but there's a couple of people who are involved in soliciting those donations, getting the cards filled out. and I think I know who the likely suspect is on this one, but so Mike will be able to hopefully help Mike get the proper paperwork to stop that donation. There's no reason in the world why somebody who does not want to make political donations to a political action fund should be having them taken out of his paycheck. So that's just one example of the kind of things that are upsetting people. Okay, let's get a couple more questions here. Some people who haven't asked anything. I know Dave's got another question in the back, but Chris, did you want to say anything?
Well, I didn't so much have a question. I wanted to say a few things. For those of you who saw me taking these furious notes over here, I'm not a reporter or anything like that. I'm taking these notes because, first of all, I thought it was an excellent presentation by both.
Well, thank you. Here, use the mic real quick.
I thought it was an excellent presentation by both. The reason I'm taking the photographs of my notes is so that I can text them back to people that I work with and tell them to come to the 3 o'clock meeting, 3:30 meeting, and show up here is definitely worth their time.
Chris is a Chrysler employee, by the way, UAW member.
And I will also mention this to you. I know Brian probably 7 or 8 years now because of some mutual efforts that we did back when the auto industry was in the tank. As much as Brian has made himself an expert on union politics and things like that, I've made myself an expert on trade policy. And at that time, we were talking about the disparity in trade deals and things like that between this country and, you know, all these trade deals that, funny enough, the UAW and the companies have all signed letters to oppose this new Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement. It's one place we're definitely in line. And the same political party that we all contribute dues to, maybe not because we want to, but because they're put there, has been fast-tracking this trade deal.
Yeah.
And even our manufacturing companies don't want this to happen. And that was one of the things that troubled me, I'll mention this too, about the whole strike fund being used to recruit members from down south, who traditionally there's, you know, 1 or 2 of these foreign automaker plants down there. There are still a lot of people in this country who purchase cars based on the idea, you know, maybe they're communication workers union members, maybe they're people that work in the Screen Actors Guild out in California. They say, I buy this Ford, GM, or Chrysler product because I know it's union made. Well, I wonder how it serves the long-term interests of the membership, many of whom are retired from these companies, to have 1 or 2 plants down south declared as union plants, and that basically becomes, okay, well now I can buy a Nissan because they're union too, when the truth is we're only talking about 1 or 2 plants down south, and you undermine the competitive position of those companies who employ us, by the way, who in my case been paying dues for 22 years, and I hope to someday retire from. And I'll mention this too, I'm a 3rd generation Chrysler employee, 3rd generation union member. My grandfather was one of the founding members of Local 212, which I am a member of. Very strong union background, and one of the things I remember my grandfather telling me when I was a little kid and would see the UAW union bug on a notepad or something like that, and just as a kid I would think it was a cool design. And he told me that one thing that made our union different from all the other unions out there who had a reputation for corruption and things like that was we only paid our dues. Our dues were based off of how much money we made. And it was 2 hours of our pay, and if the union ever wanted more money, they had to negotiate us more wages.
Exactly.
And the words of my 90-year-old grandfather came back to me when I heard that we were raising these union dues. Yep. And one other thing I'm going to mention about 2-tier also, because I think there's one gentleman here who's 2-tier. Two that are 2-tier.
There were some others, but they had to leave.
One of the ways that 2-tier works against you, I know you have some people at Ford like this, there's a greater number at Chrysler, is that there are also a union unit within Chrysler and Ford called salary bargaining unit. And those are primarily technician, usually it requires maybe a 2-year degree, some type of skill or something like that. You're the guys that are actually building prototypes or things like that.
Yeah.
It's also office workers, and it
used to be plant protection because I was one of them for 11 years. I worked for Chrysler and I was in the UPGWA, Salary Bargaining Unit,
Yeah.
United Plant Guard Workers of America for Chrysler.
And it's, you know, if you want to go a little further and advance in your career and stay within the company, this has always been a way to do it. Well, one of the ways that 2-tier now works against us is when they post those jobs, they post them internally and they post them externally. I can't tell you how many job interviews I've been on where I've had every qualification, everything they're looking for, but I'm competing against, at $28.45 an hour, a guy they can hire from the outside at $18.45 an hour. And I don't care how good you are, that's one hell of an obstacle to overcome. So I'll cut it off and say it's been an excellent meeting, very informative, and I hope some of my people turn out too.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there's another meeting at 3:30 today, same basic agenda, but if any of you talk to people at the plant when you get to work today, please remind them, there's a town hall today at 3:30, same exact thing you guys just heard. They'll be able to answer, ask any questions they want, we'll try to answer them. And it's information that I think everybody needs to have, and it will empower us and make our unions perform better. So if there's any other questions, I'll take them. I know some of you folks got to get rolling. Feel free to get up and go if you don't have any other questions. Dave, go ahead and ask yours, and for whoever wants to stay, we'll answer it.
I think some of the conversation here today is interesting. I haven't experienced none of this intimidation stuff or harassment, but if that's how you're keeping people as members, that should speak volumes to you. And anytime there's $1 billion sitting around somewhere, I think you gotta be worried. But the question I have is, how much money, if you can put a number to it, how much money that comes out of our dues annually, let's say, just out of the UAW, that you can speak to, is applied towards political causes?
Well, I can answer that question this way. When I filed as a Beck objector, what that does is exactly what you're talking about. It reduces what you're paying, which is no longer called dues because you're paying it as a non-member. It reduces it down just to the core costs of collective bargaining, representation, and grievance procedure. Those are the three things you're required to pay for, even as a non-member, before Right to Work was passed. That, for me, when I got my letter, and I'll show it to you guys if you want to see it, reduced it down to about 62% that year of what full dues were. So almost 40% of our dues were being used for things like political activity. Now, a lot of that political activity is parades and dinners and different things, but a lot of it went to TV advertisements, radio advertisements, different things like that, where they were voicing support for political candidates or their political agenda, some of which recently they've spent millions of dollars, the UAW has, on this GBLT agenda, gay, bisexual, lesbian, transgender. Now, whatever your views are on those issues, that's your personal business and it's your own business. But I don't want my dues money being spent on those things, so I had the right to opt out, and I did. So about 40%, Dave, I think.
So 40%.
Yeah, and I can't.
How many workers are in the UAW?
Right, I can't. Well, there's 585,000 active UAW members, I believe, is the current number. 150,000 approximately active in the state of Michigan. So it's a lot of money. You start doing the math in your head. They take over $1.2 million out of our plant alone, and we're not,
So tens of millions a year.
Yep, tens of millions. Well, how do you think we got $960 million into our strike fund? There's a lot of money. Yeah, it's only $72 a month or whatever out of a UAW worker's paycheck every month right now. But when you times that times tens of thousands of employees over the period of every month, year in and year out, you're talking millions and millions of dollars. They spent, back in 2004, I'll give you a quick example of the kind of money we're talking about. There was a ballot initiative, went on the Michigan ballot, to put in the Michigan Constitution to define marriage as between one man and one woman. That was the proposal. Some people had collected enough signatures to put that on the ballot, and we were going to vote on it to put it in the Michigan Constitution that marriage was defined by the state of Michigan as a union between one man and one woman. The UAW, along with a bunch of other unions, contributed money to a joint fund to run TV ads and radio ads and commercials to oppose that. They were opposing defining marriage as between one man and one woman, even though there were surveys done and polls taken that showed that their membership supported that amendment by about 70%. But the UAW, their part of the contribution to that fund was $10 million. That's just one union. They put $10 million into that fund in 2004 to oppose defining marriage is between a man and a woman. And most of their membership agreed with that proposal. But the UAW opposed it. Again, just like Obamacare and the Cadillac tax. They're for something, membership's against it. With that marriage proposal, they were for it or against it, the membership was for it. The union is not always using our money to act in our best interests. So people need to pay a little more attention, be more aware of how their dues are spent. And again, what we learned today, you've got the right now and you know the process. If you don't want to keep paying money into that fund, you can file as a Beck objector, or after September you can resign completely and pay zero. That's your right, that's your decision. But now you have the information you need to make that decision.
Okay, so after September, when the contract's being negotiated, if you wanted to resign, that's your time, not, so the Beck objector status is when your anniversary date, your hire
No,
date.
Beck objector's anytime. You
So
can
what's the
file.
anniversary date?
The anniversary date applies to, and I'll let Bill speak to it if he wants, the anniversary date applies to your dues check-off that they take automatically out of your paycheck. That it may have a clause in there, we're not sure about the UAW, it may have a clause in there that says, even if you resign from the union, we're still gonna be able to take that 60% or whatever dues out of your check. So to deny them that, you have to hit that window, and to resign from the union under right to work, that 10 to 20 days before your hiring date, you have to send them a registered letter to the International saying, I resign from the union, I no longer want you to take any dues out of my paycheck. Bill, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure.
Wait, Bill, so what he's saying is that if our intention, if my intention was to resign in September, but there was a clause in there that says that it's gonna be taken out regardless, then I would have to submit a letter to the union and the company on my anniversary date, let's say June,
Well-
and continue to pay by check until September when I resign?
You could do it that way. It depends on when your anniversary date is, and this all hinges on the exact language of any checkoff you may have signed. So I can only speak in general. Like I've seen one that I have here as an example, but I don't even know if that's the one that anyone here has signed. But it does become an issue for anyone who does want to, exercise their right to work. Is there a window period applicable even if you become a non-member, and if so, when is it? And as you mentioned, what if your window period is before the right to work date? Now, you don't have to wait to right to work to become a non-member. For example, let's say you work for Ford, the contract expires September 15th. You could become a non-member tomorrow, pay the Beck fee until September 15th, and then assuming there's not a due checkoff problem, September 16th, you're covered by right to work, don't have to pay anything. And then just to back up to your previous question about spending, there's a form that every union has to file, every private sector union. It's called an LM2 form. They have to file with the Department of Labor, and it's an annual form that basically in which the union has to list all of its receipts and disbursements, subject to certain numbers. But long story short, that form will say how much the union claims it spends on politics in any given year, and also how much it spends on representation, and there's 2 or 3 other categories of expenses. And that includes percentages of time spent. So if you want an actual number of what any particular union does, go to the internet, just type LM2. Just Google it, it'll bring you to a website about the Department of Labor, and then you can search by union, and there's all kinds of information on there. But one of the things listed is an exact dollar amount of what the union claims it spent on politics in any given year.
Okay, any other questions? Andy?
Yes, Brian, if an individual becomes a non-member agency fee payer.
Right, your
now,
Beck, you file for your Beck rights like I did.
In that case, like years ago, we voted on concessions. Now, would an individual be forfeiting their right to vote on that? They would, wouldn't they?
Yes, my understanding, yes.
Yes. The union can restrict voting on the contract to only full union members, and generally they do. So that is something, if you became a non-member, you couldn't vote on the contract.
You do give up some of those privileges, like Bill explained earlier. If you resign from the union, your relationship with the union changes. You can't go to the meetings, you don't get to vote in the union elections. You won't even get to vote on the contract. No, you get all that.
Yeah.
You get the signing bonus, absolutely. That all comes from the company. I get all my bonuses, I get my profit sharing, everything. None of that changes. You do not lose anything financially by resigning from the union. What you do lose is some of the privileges the union, they call them privileges. You vote in the union elections, you get to go to the union meetings, and like Andy was asking about the concessions, would you get to vote on that? No, you're not going to be allowed to vote on the contract. So that, that's something you need to be aware of. We're not trying to trick anybody into, resigning and then not knowing. Yeah, if you're not a union member, you're not going to get to vote on the contract and the other things that the union does. You'll still be covered by them. It's all going to apply to you, but you're not going to have a say in it.
But essentially what they're doing is holding the political stuff over your head, saying, okay, you don't have to pay this, but even though the portion of dues that you do pay goes to the day-to-day operation, you can't be a part of that. So they're forcing you to be a part of the political activity side of things, basically. Because the other portion of dues that you're paying does go to the collective bargaining and all the other stuff.
The portion of the dues that you still pay if you pay an agency fee like I do as a non-member supposedly just goes towards the collective bargaining cost, negotiating,
right. So you're paying for it, but you can't be a part of it, even though you're paying for it.
That's what Right to Work solved.
Right.
Right to Work eliminated that requirement, Dave. Good point. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that. You got to think about it for a second. Even under your Beck rights, you still have to pay for the collective bargaining, but you don't get to participate in it. You don't get to vote on anything. So, and that was wrong, and that's why we fought for Right to Work. Right to Work eliminated that requirement so that if you don't want to participate and you want to resign from the union, you're going to give up those rights to vote and go to the meetings and all that, you don't have to pay for it. It was crazy. It was wrong. So I fought for Right to Work. I got called anti-union for doing it. And I fought for it for those reasons. As a non-member now, I gave up some of those things, but I'm still covered by, what's important for everybody to remember is you're still getting your profit sharing, you're still getting your bonuses, you're still getting all that stuff. You don't lose a thing financially. All of the things in the contract still apply to you. You just don't get to vote on it. Okay, any other questions? We're at about 1:30 here, so that's what I told people. If you need to leave, feel free to go. There's a couple more questions, we'll be glad to take them.
And you lose representation when you...
No, you do not lose representation. That's a good point, thanks for asking that. The union's still legally obligated to represent you because you're in the bargaining unit. You're under their contract, which applies to the bargaining unit. Even though you're not in the union, they still are legally obligated to represent you as a member of the bargaining unit. For example, I'm not in the union. If my pay's not right for a couple weeks and the salary bosses don't correct it, I can ask my committee man to submit a grievance and get that pay corrected. And they have to do it. Are they going to be smiling about it? No, probably not. But I'm still paying for that collective bargaining process, and even if I wasn't, even if I was totally after September, they're still going to be legally obligated to represent me. If the company's violating the contract that they negotiated, even if it's in a situation that it involves me, they are obligated to make sure the company honors every part of that contract for every employee in the bargaining unit. So I would still be included in that, and they would still be required to represent me. You don't lose that if you resign. They still have to represent you. You're still in that bargaining unit. Okay? All you're giving up is your right to vote and go to their meetings and stuff. That contract's still going to apply to you, and they're still required legally to enforce it as it applies to you. Did I get that right, Bill?
Yes.
Any other questions?
Brian, do you have an extra copy of your letter?
Yes, I do. There's a few floating around here.
Actually, they're back there.
Okay, yeah, there should be a few. That's like I said, that's just a sample. That's the letter I sent in. Obviously, if you work somewhere else, you change that to whatever plant you work at, and you put your name and information in there. This is just to give you guys an idea. The address that I had on the top of my letter that I sent in, that is the address that UAW members would send their letter to if they wanted to resign and claim their Beck rights, or after September if they want to resign and pay zero. Within that time window you have to hit. This is a sample letter, and you can go to the National Right to Work, NRTW.org website, and you can get examples of this letter and all kinds of other information. These people are a great resource as an employee in a unionized workplace for you to use. So please go to their website, check out their information, and use them as a resource There's a lot of information there. These guys work for free to us. They're all funded, you know, it's a foundation, donations and grants, and they will work for us for free. So they're a great resource. Feel free to take advantage of them, use the information they put up on their website to gather information. And you're gonna have to do the work yourself, but the information's there. If you decide to do it, it's available. And hopefully, now that you know it, our elected union leadership will start to treat us a little bit better with a little more respect and listen to our concerns better. Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna wrap it up. Thank you all for coming, and I appreciate y'all taking the time to be here. Thank you.
That was good.
Pretty good.
I think so.
A few more trickled in. We ended up with 40 people.
That's good, yeah.
Cops.
That's all right.
Couple of them are reporters.